History remembers the Iron Peak dynasty for its ruthless conquests, but the secret archives of Oakhaven tell a different story. It began with a girl deemed entirely worthless by her own bloodline, forced to scrub stone floors while hiding a dormant glowing secret beneath her rags, a secret the Alpha King would kill for. The winter of 1492 was unforgiving, burying the northern fortress of Oakhaven under 6 feet of snow and ice. Within the towering stone walls of the keep, the werewolf pack known as the Frostfangs thrived, insulated by roaring hearths and thick furs. Yet, for Beatrice, the cold was a constant, biting companion. At 20 years old, Beatrice was an anomaly, a null. In a society where the first shift was a sacred rite of passage that occurred under the blood moon of a wolf's 16th year, Beatrice's bones had never broken. Her eyes had never flashed gold. She remained entirely, pathetically human. In the brutal hierarchy of the medieval lycanthrope world, a wolf who could not shift was worse than an omega. She was a parasite. Her uncle, Alpha Cedric, only allowed her to remain in the keep because her late mother was his sister. But his begrudging charity came at a steep price. Beatrice was relegated to the lowest servant quarters, a damp, drafty alcove tucked beneath the kitchens. Her days began before the sun crested the snow-capped peaks, filled with scrubbing soot from massive iron cauldrons, plucking pheasants, and hauling freezing water from the courtyard well. "You missed a spot, Null," a sharp voice echoed through the scullery. Beatrice paused, her raw, blistered hands resting on the coarse bristles of her brush. Standing in the archway was Isabella, Cedric's daughter. Clad in a luxurious gown of deep crimson velvet, trimmed with white fox fur, Isabella looked every inch the noble pack princess she was raised to be. "I will clean it immediately, Isabella," Beatrice murmured, keeping her gaze fixed on the wet flagstones. Eye contact with a superior was forbidden for a null, a rule Cedric had beaten into her on multiple occasions. "See that you do?" Isabella sneered, stepping carefully over a puddle of soapy water. "King Gideon arrives by nightfall. If the great hall smells of grease and wet dog because of your incompetence, my father will have you thrown to the perimeter guards. They've been complaining about the cold. I'm sure they'd appreciate a human warming pan." A cold shudder racked Beatrice's spine, but she simply bowed her head lower. "It will be spotless." As Isabella's footsteps faded down the corridor, Beatrice allowed herself a ragged exhale. She reached up with a trembling hand, pressing her fingers against her left shoulder blade, just beneath the collar of her rough-spun tunic. A sharp, searing pain radiated from the spot, a sensation she had endured in silence for the past 4 years. Everyone thought Beatrice was powerless. They thought her body was merely defective, incapable of harnessing the primal magic of the moon. They were wrong. Beneath the tight, blood-stained linen bandages she wore day and night, her skin bore a mark. It was not a birthmark, nor was it a brand from a hot iron. It was a jagged silver constellation that perfectly resembled the open jaws of a wolf. It had appeared on her 16th birthday, the night she was supposed to shift. Instead of fur and claws, she had been given an agony that felt like liquid moonlight burning through her veins. Whenever a powerful alpha was near, the mark would heat up, throbbing with an erratic, desperate pulse. Over the last few days, as King Gideon's royal procession drew closer to Oakhaven, the burning had become almost unbearable. Matilda, the elderly head cook and the only soul in the keep who showed Beatrice a sliver of kindness, noticed her wincing. The plump woman hobbled over, wiping flour from her apron. "Your shoulder again, child?" Matilda whispered, casting a nervous glance toward the kitchen doors. "It's worse today," Beatrice confessed, her voice barely a breath. "It feels like it's on fire, Matilda. I don't know how much longer I can hide it." "You must," Matilda said fiercely, gripping Beatrice's arm. "You know the ancient laws, Beatrice. Any wolf bearing strange magic or unidentifiable marks is considered an agent of the Dark Witches. Cedric would not hesitate to put you to the pyre. Keep it bound. Keep your head down. Tonight is merely a banquet. The king will eat, assess the tithes, perhaps negotiate a betrothal with Isabella, and be gone by the week's end." Beatrice nodded, fighting back tears of exhaustion and pain. She plunged her hands back into the freezing, soapy water. She had to survive. She had to remain invisible. But as the distant, booming howl of the royal vanguard echoed across the frozen valley, signaling the Alpha King's arrival. The silver mark on her back flared with a heat so intense she nearly collapsed. By nightfall, the great hall of Oakhaven was transformed. The long oak tables groaned under the weight of roasted boars, wheels of sharp cheese, candied root vegetables, and rivers of dark, spiced mead. Tapestries depicting the Frostfang's bloody victories hung from the walls, illuminated by hundreds of flickering tallow candles. At the head table, Alpha Cedric sat puffed with pride, his chest thrust out beneath his ceremonial furs. To his right sat Isabella, practically glowing in her crimson gown, her eyes fixed hungrily on the center seat. And in that center seat sat King Gideon of the Iron Peak clan. Gideon was a terrifying force of nature. He did not look like a pampered royal. He looked like a warlord fresh from a slaughter. Broad-shouldered and towering, he possessed sharp, aristocratic features hardened by years of brutal conflict. His hair was as dark as a raven's wing, and his eyes, a piercing, unnatural shade of icy blue, seemed to miss nothing. He wore black leather armor etched with silver runes, and a heavy cloak of direwolf fur draped over his shoulders. The air in the room was thick with his oppressive, suffocating aura. Lesser wolves had their heads permanently bowed, unable to withstand the sheer, suffocating dominance rolling off him. Beatrice felt it worst of all. She was tasked with serving wine to the lower tables, her arms trembling under the weight of heavy iron pitchers. With every step she took closer to the dais where Gideon sat, the mark on her shoulder blazed, sending shockwaves of agonizing heat down her spine. The linen bandages felt like they were melting into her skin. "Keep moving, Null," Abeta hissed as she paused to catch her breath. She gritted her teeth and hurried toward the head table. Cedric had explicitly ordered her to keep the king's goblet full, a cruel test to see if her trembling hands would betray Oakhaven's hospitality. As she approached the dais, she kept her eyes glued to the floor. She could feel Gideon's gaze sweeping the room, a predator assessing a den of prey. "Your lands are prosperous, Cedric," Gideon's voice rumbled over the din of the hall. It was deep, rough, and commanded absolute silence. The music instantly ceased. "But I did not travel through a blizzard merely to eat your meat. I am here for the census. The border skirmishes grow worse. I need able-bodied warriors. And you shall have them, my king," Cedric replied smoothly. "Oakhaven breeds the finest fighters in the north. And, perhaps, we might offer you something more, a lasting alliance. My daughter, Isabella, has just come of age." Beatrice stepped up to the dais, her heart hammering against her ribs. She moved to pour the spiced mead into Isabella's goblet first. Isabella, seizing the moment to demonstrate her high status and casual cruelty before the king, subtly shifted her foot, hooking her heel around Beatrice's ankle just as the servant girl leaned forward. The heavy iron pitcher slipped. Beatrice stumbled, crying out as she hit the stone floor. A splash of dark red mead flew through the air, splattering violently against Isabella's pristine crimson velvet gown. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. "You clumsy, worthless wretch!" Isabella shrieked, leaping to her feet and slapping Beatrice across the face. The crack echoed like a whip. "Look what you've done to my gown!" Beatrice scrambled backward, her cheeks stinging, her eyes wide with terror. "I am sorry, my lady. I tripped." "Silence!" Cedric roared, kicking his chair back. His eyes flashed a dangerous feral yellow. Humiliated in front of the Alpha King, his rage was instantaneous and explosive. "You bring shame to my house, Null. I warned you that your incompetence would no longer be tolerated." Cedric descended the steps of the dais, his claws extending from his fingertips. The hall was dead silent. No one dared interfere with an Alpha's discipline. "My king, forgive this interruption," Cedric snarled, grabbing Beatrice by the collar of her rough tunic and hauling her to her feet. She was entirely weightless in his massive grip. "This creature is a blight on our pack, a Null. She knows nothing but disrespect. I will make an example of her." Beatrice thrashed, panic overriding her submission. "No, please, uncle, please. It was an accident." 50 lashes, Cedric declared to the room, ignoring her pleas. Here and now. He shoved her violently to her knees in the center of the hall. To ensure the whip would make contact with bare flesh, Cedric grabbed the back of Beatrice's tunic and tore it violently downward. The coarse fabric ripped with a loud sound, pulling the blood-soaked linen bandages with it. The cloth fell away, exposing Beatrice's bare back to the cold air and to the entire court. Cedric raised his hand, a heavy leather scourge uncoiling from his belt, but the strike never landed. A sound like a thunderclap rattled the stained glass windows. King Gideon was suddenly on his feet, his chair shattered into splinters behind him. His icy blue eyes were entirely black, consumed by his lichen. The hall gasped, not at the king's sudden fury, but at the girl on the floor. Freed from its bindings, the mark on Beatrice's left shoulder blade was no longer a dormant, jagged scar. Exposed to the unbridled, aggressive aura of the Alpha King, the mark ignited. It glowed with a blinding, ethereal silver light, illuminating the dark stone around her. The intricate shape of the howling wolf's jaw was unmistakable, radiating an ancient, suppressed power that made the air in the room hum with static electricity. Cedric froze, the whip dropping from his trembling hand. What witchcraft is this? Gideon did not walk down the steps. He vaulted them. In a blur of supernatural speed, he was standing over Beatrice, a low, terrifying growl vibrating in his chest. He shoved Cedric backward with such force that the local Alpha flew across the room, crashing into a heavy oak table. Beatrice cowered, wrapping her arms around herself, sobbing in anticipation of the king's execution. She had been exposed. The monster of Iron Peak was going to kill her. Instead, a heavy, warm fur cloak descended over her shivering shoulders, obscuring the glowing mark. Beatrice flinched, looking up through her tears. King Gideon was kneeling before her, ignoring the spilled wine soaking into his leather armor. His massive, calloused hand reached out, gently tilting her chin up so her terrified eyes met his entirely blackened ones. When he spoke, the feral rage was gone, replaced by a trembling, reverent awe that sent shockwaves through the silent hall. "You are no Null," the Alpha King breathed, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "You are the last bloodline of the Silver Crescent, and you are my mate." The great hall of Oakhaven was engulfed in a suffocating, terrifying silence. Not a single wolf dared to breathe as King Gideon, the most feared warlord in the Northern Territories, knelt in the spilled mead before a trembling, ragged servant girl. "Mate?" Alpha Cedric choked out, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He staggered forward, clutching his bruised ribs where Gideon had thrown him. "My king, surely the moon plays tricks on your eyes. That creature is Beatrice. She is a Null. She is entirely devoid of magic, a weak, defective human who could not even survive her first shift." Gideon did not look at Cedric. He slowly stood, bringing Beatrice up with him. He kept his heavy direwolf cloak securely wrapped around her shoulders, shielding her exposed back from the staring eyes of the court. When Gideon finally turned his head to address the local Alpha, his icy blue eyes promised absolute slaughter. "If you speak of my queen with that filthy tongue again, Cedric," Gideon's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that shook the crystal goblets on the tables, "I will tear it from your throat and feed it to the crows." Isabella's face drained of all color, her crimson gown forgotten. She stared at Beatrice with a mixture of profound shock and venomous hatred. The girl she had tormented, the girl whose face she had slapped mere moments ago, was the destined mate of the Alpha King. "Clear the upper chambers," Gideon commanded, his gaze sweeping over the paralyzed guards. "Now, and bring the elderly cook. Matilda, was it? She is the only one in this cursed fortress I trust to touch my mate." Within minutes, Beatrice was whisked away from the damp, freezing scullery and brought to the most opulent guest suite in Oakhaven. A roaring fire crackled in the massive stone hearth, casting a warm, goldish glow over the plush velvet bedding. Matilda gently cleaned Beatrice's face, murmuring quiet prayers to the moon goddess, while Gideon stood by the window, his massive frame tense, keeping a watchful eye on the courtyard below. Once Matilda finished binding Beatrice's shoulder with fresh, soft linens and slipped a beautiful silk gown over her head, Gideon approached the bed. He motioned for the cook to leave them, Beatrice pulled her knees to her chest, her heart hammering frantically. "My king, I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am broken. I cannot shift. If I am your mate, I will only bring shame to the Iron Peak clan." Gideon knelt by the bed, his expression softening into something entirely tender. "You are not broken, Beatrice. You were hidden." He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently resting over the bandages on her left shoulder. The warmth of his touch sent a soothing, electric hum through her skin, completely erasing the agonizing burn she had felt for years. Centuries later, an esteemed historian named Lord William Cavendish would unearth a series of sealed, leather-bound diaries hidden in a private estate vault in London. Gideon began, his voice taking on the cadence of an ancient storyteller. "Cavendish's private records proved that what I am about to tell you is not myth, but real, documented history. Long ago, the werewolf world was balanced by a bloodline known as the Silver Crescent. They were peacekeepers, possessing a pure, lunar magic that far exceeded normal shifting. But they were hunted, slaughtered out of jealousy." Beatrice's eyes widened. "Hunted by who?" "By Cedric's grandfather," Gideon revealed grimly. "The Frostfangs wanted dominance over the North. They wiped out the Silver Crescent pack, or so they thought. Your mother, Beatrice, was the last royal daughter of that line. When she realized Cedric would eventually kill you if he sensed your potential, she used the last of her ancient magic to place a binding seal on you. The mark on your back is that seal." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as the pieces finally clicked together. The burning, the inability to shift it, was all a desperate mother's protection. "The seal suppressed your wolf, your scent, and your magic to keep you alive," Gideon explained, his thumb wiping a tear from her cheek. "But a seal of that magnitude can only be broken by one thing: the presence of an alpha king whose soul is bound to yours. Your mark has been fighting to break free ever since I crossed into your valley." Down in the subterranean cellars of Oakhaven, a much darker conversation was taking place. Cedric paced furiously among the barrels of ale, his eyes glowing with feral, yellow rage. Isabella stood by the damp stone wall, her fists clenched so tightly her manicured nails bit into her palms. "She will take everything," Isabella hissed, her voice dripping with poison. "She will sit on a throne in Iron Peak, and she will order our executions for how we treated her. We are dead, Father." "Not yet," Cedric snarled, grabbing a heavy iron key from the wall. He unlocked a hidden iron chest beneath the floorboards. Inside sat a series of glass vials filled with a sickly, glowing green liquid. "Refined, liquid wolfsbane, laced with crushed silver. Gideon claims the girl is his mate, which means he is blind to all else. He is distracted, vulnerable." "You would assassinate the Alpha King?" Isabella gasped, though a wicked smile slowly crept onto her lips. "I will protect my pack," Cedric corrected coldly. "We will attack his chambers tonight. We will say rogues breached the perimeter. By the time the king's vanguard realizes what has happened, Gideon and the Null will both be nothing but corpses in the snow." Midnight draped over Oakhaven like a heavy, suffocating shroud. Outside, the blizzard howled, masking the stealthy, deliberate footsteps of Cedric and his 10 most loyal, ruthless guards as they crept up the spiral staircase toward the royal guest chambers. Inside the room, Beatrice had finally fallen into an exhausted, fitful sleep, wrapped securely in Gideon's massive arms. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. The constant, agonizing burn on her back had been replaced by a comforting, rhythmic pulse that matched the beating of Gideon's heart. But a king is never truly off his guard. Gideon's icy blue eyes snapped open in the dark. The faint, metallic scent of drawn steel and the distinct, acrid odor of wolfsbane drifted under the heavy oak door. "Beatrice," Gideon whispered urgently, shaking her awake. "Stay behind the bed. Do not move, no matter what happens." "Gideon," she mumbled, panic flooding her veins as she saw him silently unsheath a massive, dark steel broadsword. Before she could comprehend the danger, the heavy oak door exploded inward, blown off its iron hinges. Splinters rained across the room as Cedric's assassins poured in. Gideon moved with terrifying, lethal grace. He didn't bother to shift. His lichen strength was more than enough in the confined space. With a single, devastating swing of his broadsword, he cleaved the first two guards in half. Blood sprayed across the opulent tapestries. He grabbed a third guard by the throat, crushing his windpipe with a sickening crunch before hurling him into the fireplace. "Protect the Alpha!" one of the assassins screamed. "Die, you northern tyrant!" Cedric roared, stepping through the ruined doorway. He raised a heavy crossbow, the bolt dripping with the glowing green, silver-laced wolfsbane. Gideon lunged, but another guard threw himself at the king's legs. The slight delay was all Cedric needed. He pulled the trigger. The heavy bolt buried itself deep into Gideon's chest, piercing the leather armor and embedding into his ribcage. Gideon let out a deafening, earth-shattering roar of pain. The silver burned through his veins like battery acid, while the highly concentrated wolfsbane paralyzed his healing factor. He dropped to one knee, coughing up dark blood, but still managed to swing his sword, taking the legs out from under the guard who had tripped him. "Gideon!" Beatrice screamed, scrambling out from behind the bed. "No! Stay back!" Gideon commanded, his voice strained as the veins in his neck turned black from the poison. Cedric laughed, a cruel, triumphant sound. He reloaded his crossbow. The great Alpha King, felled in a guest room, and now, the little null. Beatrice stared at Gideon, watching the life drain from the most powerful wolf in the world, the man who had looked at her with reverence instead of disgust, the man who had given her a name, a history, and a future. Something inside Beatrice snapped. It wasn't just a mental break. It was a physical, tectonic shift within her very soul. The agonizing pain she had felt for years rushed back, but it wasn't burning her this time. It was fueling her. The binding seal on her back, the silver mark of the howling wolf, shattered completely. A blinding, ethereal silver light erupted from her body, illuminating the blood-soaked room with the intensity of a fallen star. The remaining assassins dropped their weapons, shielding their eyes in terror. Cedric stumbled backward, his crossbow falling from his trembling hands. "What is this?" Beatrice didn't answer. She couldn't. The long-suppressed magic of the silver crescent coursed through her veins. Her bones cracked, reshaping and reforming with terrifying, painless speed. In the span of a single heartbeat, the ragged servant girl was gone. In her place stood a magnificent, massive wolf. Her fur was not the standard brown, black, or gray of the northern packs. It was pure, shimmering silver, glowing with a luminescent aura that cast a heavenly light against the dark stone walls. She was easily as large as Gideon's lichen form, her eyes blazing with an ancient, mesmerizing gold. The private archives of William Cavendish would later describe this legendary shift as the rebirth of the moon's favored daughter. Beatrice let out a howl that shattered the remaining stained glass windows. It wasn't a sound of mourning. It was a promise of absolute destruction. She moved faster than the human eye could track. She slammed into Cedric's remaining guards, her massive jaws snapping steel armor and bone with equal ease. She tossed them aside like broken dolls, moving with a fluid, magical grace that left trails of silver light in the air. Within seconds, the room was silent, save for the terrified, ragged breathing of Alpha Cedric. He was backed into a corner, completely trapped. Beatrice, the legendary silver wolf, stalked toward him. She lowered her massive head, bearing fangs that gleamed like polished diamonds. "Mercy," Cedric whimpered, falling to his knees and raising his hands. "Please, Beatrice, I am your blood." She showed him the exact amount of mercy he had shown her for 20 years. With one swift, brutal strike of her massive paw, she crushed Cedric's chest, ending his tyrannical reign instantly. The immediate threat eliminated, Beatrice shifted back to her human form. The transformation was just as smooth, the silver light fading into her skin. She rushed to Gideon's side, ignoring her own nakedness, falling to her knees beside his massive, bleeding frame. Gideon's eyes were glassy, his breathing shallow. The wolfsbane was killing him. "No, no, no!" Beatrice sobbed, pressing her hands against the gaping wound in his chest. "You cannot leave me! I just found you!" As her tears fell, splashing onto Gideon's bloody chest, a miraculous thing happened. The tears of the Silver Crescent Royal, imbued with pure lunar magic, began to glow. Where the tears touched his skin, the blackened, poisoned veins rapidly faded back to their normal color. The silver in the wound was forcefully expelled from his body, the metal clattering onto the stone floor. Gideon gasped, pulling in a massive breath of air. His icy blue eyes focused, staring up at Beatrice in absolute awe. His healing factor kicked into overdrive, sealing the fatal wound in seconds. He reached up, pulling her down against his chest, wrapping her tightly in his arms as she wept with relief. By sunrise, the blizzard had passed. The courtyard of Oakhaven was filled not with the sounds of daily chores, but with the entire Frostfang pack kneeling in absolute submission. Isabella, stripped of her finery, was bound in iron chains, destined for the dungeon. Standing on the high balcony, wrapped in a regal direwolf cloak, Beatrice looked down at the pack that had tortured her. But she did not feel vengeance. She felt the calm, immense power of her ancestors. Gideon stood beside her, his hand firmly holding hers, presenting the new, undisputed queen of the Iron Peak clan to the world. The powerless servant was gone forever, and the reign of the Silver Crescent had officially begun. The legends of the Silver Crescent aren't just fantasy. They are a testament to the fact that true power can never be kept in the dark forever. If Beatrice and Gideon's epic tale of betrayal, hidden magic, and destined love kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe for more untamed, real-life dramatic lore.